Live Curious, 내셔널지오그래픽 채널.
The F-4 Phantom. It served armed forces across the globe for over 5 decades. But this veteran warbird is headed to an Air Force base in Germany, where a crew will break it down. They'll rip apart over 10 tons of metal and deactivate dangerous explosives, all to salvage valuable parts and give other planes new life. But at least one F-4 will go down in a final blaze of glory.
Clear the drone, clear the drone, clear the drone.
호기심에는 연령 제한이 없습니다. Live Curious, 내셔널지오그래픽 채널.
Jever Air Force Base, a bustling military outpost in northern Germany. It's here that they gut about a dozen decommissioned fighter jets every year. This F-4 Phantom fighter jet was retired from active duty about 6 months ago. F-4s have flown for decades in North America, Europe, and the Middle East. This one made its final landing at Jever. But now, this fighting machine, equipped with twin turbojet engines, is headed for a breakdown. The man in charge is Captain Christian Nastula.
Fahrwerk ausfahren.
He directs all breakdown operations here.
Okay, Fahrwerk einfahren.
The aircraft behind me was built in the early 70s. It has now passed 6,300 flying hours. You can say that it reached the end of its life.
This F-4 may have been grounded, but its service to country isn't over. There are still about 50 F-4s serving in the German Air Force. And this decommissioned fighter is a critical source of the components needed to keep the fleet going. That's what brings Captain Timo Young on base. He works with an active squadron of F-4 Phantoms, and he's eager to get his hands on some of the fighter jet's components.
We need spare parts for the other planes that we are still flying, and the F-4 is not produced anymore, so we are quite in need of some spare parts. Every plane that we have in service is older than I am. It's an old lady, but it's getting the job done.
It's a high-stakes operation that has to be done right. It takes about 10 teams of specialists to break her down. Not only is the plane big, but it's still armed with weapons that must be deactivated safely. The crew will systematically dismantle her piece by piece over a 10-week period. The breakdown will unfold in 3 stages. Stage 1, testing. Check the mechanics and electronics to find out what's working and if it can be salvaged. Stage 2, disarm, remove and destroy any remaining weaponry. Then comes the labor-intensive part. Stage 3, dismantle. Remove all salvageable components, including the engines, ejection seats, wings, and dozens of internal instruments. When they're done, all that will be left is the aluminum carcass. And a shipment of vital parts ready to be rebuilt and installed in active-duty Phantoms. Stage 1 of the breakdown kicks off with a crucial test of the power behind the package, the Phantom's twin turbine engines. This model is no longer in production and can't be replaced, so every engine they can salvage is a potential gold mine. They could go for upwards of $1 million on the open market. But first, Captain Nastula needs to put the engines through a series of tests to make sure they're in top condition.
The engine is really complicated. It's really a piece of art.
These engines can propel the jet to Mach 2, twice the speed of sound.
You have to pay a very close attention to every detail of the engine. The temperature, the revolutions per minute, the amount of fuel that's going through the engine, and that everything is working properly.
But firing up a jet in an enclosed space is a dangerous operation. Each engine will be fired to maximum capacity, sending flames jutting 4 meters behind the fuselage. Anything in the flame's path is toast. So Captain Nastula orders the crew to clear the hangar of anything flammable. Then they scour the area for foreign objects, looking for anything that could get sucked into the engines and cause an explosion. Though it's rare, an exploding jet engine could cause a catastrophe and endanger the entire crew.
I was inspecting the compressor rotors for visual damage and foreign objects that might reside in the air intake.
But it's not just the breakdown crew they have to worry about. It's a risky procedure, but crucial. These engines will be installed on active planes. Even the smallest defect could cause an airborne disaster.
The technicians, we have to trust them because they're responsible that the engine is working properly. Their work affects our flight safety. And after they are done with their work, we are ready for the engines test.
After hours of preparation, the crew is ready to fire it up. But suddenly, a technician catches a problem: a small gas leak in one of the engine's fuel pipes. If they start the engines now, a fire could break out. Or worse, a deadly explosion.
They had to replace a part of the fuel pipeline.
Pressure is off.
Captain Nastula is worried. The fuel linkage could endanger his crew. He assigned Staff Sergeant Karsten Karolus, one of his most experienced mechanics, to fix it.
I'll have to attach a safety wire so that the lug nut in the fuel line will not detach again.
It's a bit difficult. Sometimes you can see what you're doing, sometimes you can only see what your hands are telling you.
Hopefully, the problem will be resolved quickly and they can resume the engine test.
He's giving full pressure.
Any updates? I've released pressure.
All right, we checked the pipe. I think it's fine now.
We just got the message that the installed fuel pipeline is tight. Everything's working properly now, so we can start in a couple of minutes.
But Captain Nastula isn't taking any chances. He calls in the fire brigade.
The fire crew are basically as a safety precaution here because it could be that fuel is leaking in the engine compartment and igniting, and then we would have fire. We are ready for the engines test, so we have to leave the area, clear it for our safety.
They'll run the engines through a number of performance tests. The engines must reach maximum thrust. Then they must push even harder by engaging the afterburner. Captain Nastula gives the order: start the engines.
Compressed air is pumped into the engine. It starts to rotate and ignites. And then it's running under its own power.
The engines are on. Now it's time to gun it.
Now he's increasing the thrust to military, that's 100%. They're checking if it's still working as it's supposed to.
Wenn es möglich ist.
The fire brigade goes on high alert.
Now they're increasing the thrust.
As air enters the jet engine, it compresses and mixes with fuel inside the turbine. This mixture explodes and expands rapidly. When the expanded air leaves the rear of the turbine, it creates thrust. The engines reach full military thrust. These powerful motors facilitated numerous speed records for the F-4 back in the day.
Everything is working normal.
Then, Captain Christian Nastula instructs the crew to engage the afterburner. The afterburner injects fuel directly into the airstream at the rear of the engine's turbine. This increases the engine's thrust by as much as 50%. Pilots use the afterburner during takeoff and when traveling at supersonic speeds. But generally, they exercise restraint because the afterburner uses so much fuel. The engines are good to go. The crew has hit pay dirt. Two of the most valuable parts on the jet are fit for breakdown, and the fuel pipe held.
Everything worked as it's supposed to.
This F-4 may be headed for a breakdown, but her engines will live to fly another day. Germany and 10 other countries have adopted the F-4 Phantom from the American military. Debuted in 1958, the F-4 is one of America's earliest fighter jets. It's seen action during the Cold War, Vietnam, and Operation Desert Storm. Pilots credit its endurance to its versatility and its ability to carry huge payloads of weapons. The U.S. military phased out the F-4 in the mid-90s. But instead of breaking them down, the Air Force has come up with an alternate retirement plan. Convert some of the remaining arsenal into unmanned drones to become target practice for America's next generation of fighter pilots.
Bandit, AC-01, arm hot, start a fire. Fox 2. Not bad.
At Tyndall Air Force Base near Panama City, Florida, dozens of fighter pilots from all over the United States and Canada gather for weapons evaluation and tactical training. They're here to test new missiles and practice air-to-air combat with their squadrons, using remote-controlled F-4 Phantom drones as the target. "17-year Air Force veteran Lieutenant Colonel Ron Stuff Miller will command an unmanned enemy in a fight with a team of 6 fighter pilots. And he knows how to tell a drone from a regular F-4.
The white container you see on the left wingtip is one on the right wing, one up on the tail, and one down the nose. Those are some of the subtle cues that it's a remote aircraft.
Using these sensors, strategists can remotely monitor an aircraft under attack and assess missile performance based on that information.
Well, those white antennas provide us a method of scoring the aircraft. What that means is when a missile is shot at the aircraft, it helps determine how close that missile came to the aircraft, the speed, angle, trajectory, all that type stuff. Looks good, looks like an F-4. It helps us analyze post-mission how well we did or did not do with the missile.
Airspeed indication.
A retired F-4 Phantom costs about $2.5 million to convert to a target drone.
31 left, wind 220 at 14, clear for takeoff.
With such a high price tag, Lieutenant Colonel Miller hopes to avoid shooting the F-4 target out of the sky. But in a dogfight, there's no guarantee. Day 2 of the F-4 Phantom breakdown in Germany. The jet arrives at its new hangar. In a matter of weeks, the crew will reduce this once mighty fighter to scrap. But before the breakdown kicks into high gear, a crew needs to put the F-4's flight controls and landing mechanisms through strenuous testing to determine which parts can be recycled and which parts will have to be scrapped. Captain Nastula knows that the smallest damage or leak could cause critical systems failure in the air, a risk he's not willing to take.
It's immensely important to ensure that these devices that are to fly again or to be installed in another aircraft are 100% functional. Only then can we send them back into rotation with a clear conscience.
First up, the landing gear.
Okay, wings next.
And lastly, the stabilizer and rudder.
You can turn off hydraulics, and then we go over to the next step.
The jet's hydraulics get a passing grade.
Okay, danke.
The safety check is complete. They've got a gold mine of recyclable parts. But before they get to those components, there's one more critical stage of the breakdown: disarming. The F-4 Phantom is one mean fighting machine. Every Phantom is equipped with 9 weapon stations. Fully loaded, the jet can carry up to 8 tons of ammunition, including air-to-air and air-to-ground missiles and nuclear bombs. The military has already removed the heavy hitters, but one.
We have one cannon, one Vulcan 20mm Gatling gun. We have it in the front of the plane. The cannon can fire 6,000 rounds per minute. That means 100 rounds per second. And it's for our self-defense, so that we could protect ourselves in case we are in a close-in fight with an enemy fighter.
But the cannon is one piece that won't end up in the recycling bin. If it ended up in the wrong hands, it could reappear illegally on the black market.
It will be carefully removed by a technician, going to be destroyed so nobody can use it again.
It's a job that calls for a weapons expert. Corporal Andre Sonnenberg. At 23, he's one of the youngest mechanics on the base, but he's an old pro when it comes to cannon removal. This cannon is a so-called Gatling gun. Each of the cannon's 6 barrels fires once during each revolution of the barrel cluster. This adds up to 100 rounds per second. Such rapid fire is necessary in combat between supersonic aircraft because a target may only be in gun sight for a second or less at a time.
I'll have to disconnect this plug to cut electricity from the cannon so nothing can happen anymore.
Und da jetzt nichts mehr passieren kann.
First, he mounts a set of safety trestles for support. At 308 kilograms, it could seriously injure him if it came crashing down.
I can monitor and control where the arm must go in order to be able to mount the cannon on the stand.
Corporal Sonnenberg now eases the weapon out of its station.
With this wheel here, I will drive this rod up and down so that I can make a correction if it doesn't fit with the arm.
If the cannon jerks too wildly, it could fall off the support trestles. The cannon's free. Now he's got to break it down to dispose of it safely. Then welder Uwe Chablewski takes over. He sears through the cannon's steel parts with a blowtorch. When the job's done, this once powerful weapon is nothing more than a harmless pile of metal. But some of the toughest work still looms: the dismantle. At last, the breakdown crew can get to the critical components and ultimately the mother lode, the 2-ton engines. The crew will remove the ejection seats, the canopies, the landing gear, the engines, the wings, dozens of instruments and electronics, and kilometers of wiring. At the end, only the airframe will remain.
Kommt ihr mal kurz zum Briefing?
Individual teams specialize in the dismantling of different parts of the plane. Over the course of the next 2 months, they'll each take a turn making mincemeat out of the Phantom. First on deck, the ejection seat. The ejection seat is there to save lives. But if something goes wrong, it can be the most dangerous step of the breakdown.
We have rockets that eject the seat from the plane. If they would explode on the ground, they could seriously injure the technicians that are near the airplane.
This is why ejection seat removal is a job for highly trained specialists. The ejection seat of an F-4 Phantom is powered by a rocket package that can shoot a pilot to safety in an emergency situation. Deactivating the rockets for breakdown is tricky and potentially hazardous. Technicians must remove a small firing mechanism, a 5-centimeter rocket propulsion cartridge buried beneath the ejection seat, without accidentally triggering the rockets. First Sergeant Michael Horn leads the 2-man crew. A 25-year Air Force veteran, he's known for being cool under pressure. At his side is mechanic Jürgen Bruning.
The ejection seat cartridge is right under here where I'm working now. And right here is the ammunition. I'm about to disarm it. All right, here's the ammunition. Now the seat can't eject anymore.
With the rocket disarmed, they can now do what they do best: break it down. They must carefully remove each part of the ejection seat so that it can be reassembled in an active Phantom. First, they remove the parachute.
It's all sealed in this container here. We don't really touch it.
Then they remove the flotation device, followed by the seat bucket.
This hand wheel releases the entire ejection seat so that we can take out the seat bucket. It's damn tight in here. We must be careful to not leave any parts in the cockpit.
From here, it's all muscle. The seat bucket and ejector module weigh around 116 kilograms.
We need 3 guys for this part because it's very heavy. And we have to be careful.
Another valuable recyclable leaves the jet. In a matter of days, this ejection seat could be installed in an active F-4 Phantom. For the next month, the breakdown goes into overdrive. Technicians remove the canopies from both cockpits. The landing gear is next to go. Then, Captain Nastula and his crew set their sights on the biggest prize of all, the engines. The engines are the most valuable parts on the jet. Each could sell for close to $1 million. They also weigh about 2 tons each. If they can get them out intact, they've hit the jackpot. It takes at least 5 specialists, a hydraulic lift, and a lot of elbow grease to remove them.
Diese Wiege
We gotta line up the lift with the engine so it fits perfectly.
und festgemacht werden.
Once they remove the screws, the engines slide out in one big piece. From here, every engine gets another checkup. Jet engine mechanics Rainer Friese and Frank Zierat inspect every engine's interior using an optical tool known as a borescope. The borescope is a snake-like camera that helps them find tiny hairline fractures, foreign objects, and anything that can be a potential hazard. If an engine needs a fix, these are the guys to do it. But not in this case. These engines are headed for an active fighter jet. The F-4 Phantom breakdown is in full swing. The cannon, ejection seats, canopies, landing gear, and engines have all come off and are on their way to the recycle bin. Next up, the wings. The crew will remove the outer wing panels from the jet. Mechanics at another base await their arrival. And to do this, they must pull out slender steel bolts sandwiched between the inner and the outer wing flaps. Removing the wing is labor-intensive, requiring multiple specialists. But the job usually takes no more than 2 hours. The crew uses a specially designed tool called a puller to remove the bolts.
The bolt is under heavy tension and we have to pull it out right now.
We're giving the smallest guy the toughest job, huh?
Well, he volunteered.
Fertig?
But the bolt won't budge. What should be straightforward is turning into a major challenge.
The difficulty, as you can see right now, is with the bolt. With older aircraft that are exposed to weather, you get corrosion.
The bolt isn't going anywhere. The breakdown crew still struggles to remove the wing from the F-4 Phantom. The bolt won't budge. Another specialist puts some muscle into it. Finally, the bolt gives way. It was a tougher job than everyone expected. The crew must hustle to break it down. The wing might be needed for another plane. Back at Tyndall Air Force Base in Florida, fighter pilots are about to test new missiles in a simulated dogfight. The enemy? An unmanned F-4 Phantom that's been converted to a military target drone. It could return to base in one piece, but it could also end up blown to bits over the Gulf of Mexico. Simulating a dogfight safely and effectively is a major undertaking. It takes a crew of more than 60 to get the job done. 6 fighter pilots are already suiting up.
You guys like to remove the patches to simulate you're going to war. It's kind of a pre-game ritual.
Major Doug Nojo Riggs is one of Tyndall's top fighter pilots.
G-suit. It's got an air bladder. You can actually blow it up to keep it from passing out when you're under G's.
Although the objective is not to shoot the drone out of the sky, it's a tough temptation to resist.
Makes a big explosion. It's fun to watch as it's going down.
Checks good.
As commander for this mission, it's Lieutenant Colonel Ron Stuff Miller's job to coordinate the drone and manned planes. He'll escort the target drone to the flight zone, where the dogfight will take place.
Any aspect of the shot may occur, from shooting in front of the drone, which is the red aircraft in this case, or shooting from behind the drone, from the beam of the drone, below the drone, or above the drone.
They're just minutes away from takeoff.
I'm hoping that one of the missiles gets a lucky shot and takes out the stab or the wing of the F-4, in which case it's injured and it's out of control, and they'll need to use me as the chase pilot to roll in and gun it. And if that happens, then you get to see it blow up, and that's kind of what every fighter pilot dreams.
Major Riggs will shoot at the target drone in an F-16, also known as a Viper. It's loaded with 2 live AMRAAM 120 missiles.
It's an active missile. This is the newest model, one of our most expensive missiles. This one today will be shot at the QF-4, as long as nothing goes wrong. The warhead has been taken out and removed and replaced with a telemetry kit. Here's the tractor pod. This is what the guys on the ground will be using to see where our position is. You excited? Oh yeah. I am. It's nice and cool.
The guys on the ground are the controllers who operate the unmanned target drone. They're central to this mission. Two backup controllers are stationed along the runway. They're there just in case the drone gets damaged and needs to be landed manually.
And Westone X-ray, what final altitude we'd like to set?
Lead controller David Jacobs will pilot the drone remotely. He has no visual on the drone, only what he sees on the screen.
Like my wife says, what does your husband do for a living? He plays $1 Million Nintendo.
The star of this operation is the F-4 Phantom target drone. It's equipped with a telemetry kit that will beam valuable information about missile trajectories back to Central Command. The drone's headed for the runway start. Typically, these drones survive 3 to 5 dogfights. This could be its last.
ATO selected.
But first, they've got to get the target drone airborne. Back at Jever Air Force Base in Germany, the dismantle phase of the breakdown comes to a close. The biggest parts have been stripped off. Now, over the next month, specialists will tear apart what remains of the F-4 Phantom. They'll pick off dozens of instruments and electronics, kilometers of wiring, and hundreds of kilograms of metal. The challenge is separating the working parts from the defective ones. If a defective piece ends up in an active fighter jet, it could have disastrous consequences for pilots and crew. It's up to Sergeant Major Klaus Dieter Skowron to inspect it all.
We have a card for each module, this material routing card, and it remains with the module from beginning to end.
Each card is marked with a unique barcode. They scan recyclable parts into a maintenance database, which are then packaged and shipped to a warehouse until they're needed. Sergeant Major Scouron and his crew have their hands full yanking out the F-4 Phantom's fuel distribution system. Instruments from the cockpit are the last to go. There's one instrument pilots can't do without, the Attitude Direction Indicator, or ADI. The ADI shows the aircraft's orientation relative to the Earth. Captain Timo Young urgently needs it for another plane at his home base.
Especially when we fly in the clouds, it's possible that we lose our orientation, and therefore we have to rely on that instrument.
If it's in good shape, the ADI will end up in Captain Young's hands shortly. 2.5 months after the breakdown began, Captain Nastula and his team have successfully harvested every reusable component from this former fighter jet. All that's left is a stripped-down airframe. Eventually, it'll be auctioned off to an independent contractor to be shredded and sold for scrap. But that's not a job for Captain Nastula and his team. For now, he needs his hangar back. And that means moving the airframe to a spot they call the graveyard. But getting it there is a massive undertaking. The airframe weighs about 8 tons. For this job, it's all hands on deck. Following close behind the airframe is a giant crane. The crane's equipped with an arm that can extend 22 meters and solid 22-millimeter thick cables that can lift objects weighing as much as 20 tons. It'll pick up and drop the airframe in the graveyard. But the crane must align perfectly with the flatbed so that its arm is directly above the airframe's center of gravity during the lift. If the alignment's off, the airframe could swing wildly, injuring everyone in its path. The flatbed driver moves into place. Then the crane operator pulls up alongside.
Now the crane is extending the supports.
The supports help stabilize the crane as it lifts. The crane is too far from the flatbed to safely lift the airframe.
That doesn't look good.
They've got to be parallel. But the crane operator can't get too close. He's got to leave enough room for the supports on either side.
It's a precision job now. The crane is in position now. Everything should go as planned from here. It's looking pretty good now.
But Captain Nastula spots the same problem again. The alignment between crane and flatbed is still off. If the operator lifts the airframe now, 8 tons of metal could swing out of control.
Once 8 tons are on the move, they're on the move.
The crane operator extends the arm a little higher and then tries to center it above the airframe. The crew will now have to eyeball it. Captain Nastula isn't sure if the plan will work, but he takes a gamble and gives the go-ahead. The gamble pays off. This once mighty fighter jet reaches its resting place.
Many people poured their very lifeblood into this. They invested a lot of initiative and tons of know-how so that this aircraft would fly. And now it's kind of like throwing it into the trash can. It's quite a strange feeling.
It may be the end of the road for this F-4 Phantom, but its recycled parts will live on in active fighter jets across Germany. While one F-4 breakdown ends, another one is heating up at Tyndall Air Force Base in Florida. The drone leaves the base first.
Brakes off.
This could be its final takeoff.
Afterburner.
Now it's the pilot's turn. David Jacobs operates the drone remotely from the control center.
Copy, Whetstone, pushing it up. And Whetstone X-ray, what final altitude we'd like to set?
He guides the F-4 Phantom target drone south over the Gulf of Mexico. Lieutenant Colonel Ron Stuff Miller escorts the unmanned drone to the engagement zone in a manned F-4 Phantom.
Got it, thank you.
He's also the controller's eyes and ears in the air. If there's a hit, it's his job to check it out.
He says 1-1 check. 1-2, 1-3, 1-4, 1-5. Two's no joy. Two's no joy.
Captain Doug Nojo Riggs and the other fighter pilots arm their missiles.
He says 1-1, have wingman, string above 3.
If a missile comes near, the target drone's telemetry kit will record the trajectory of every shot. Controller Jacobs guides the drone over to the pilots along a simulated track.
Copy, Whetstone.
2 on a profile pop-up.
They appear in red on his screen.
Whetstone X-ray, am I cleared to the IP and hot down track?
Aces 03 in parameters, cleared to fire.
As the dogfight swings into action, Lieutenant Colonel Miller falls back. He doesn't want to be mistaken for the unmanned drone. One of Major Riggs' wingmen takes a first shot.
Cleared to fire.
It's a miss. The pilot gets one more chance for the kill. The missile comes within centimeters of the drone. Its computers tell drone control that the trajectory of the missile is on track.
Okay, looking good.
Now, Major Riggs goes in for a shot.
Let's try that again.
Direct hit. Lieutenant Colonel Miller moves in and confirms the drone is damaged beyond repair. The missile's trajectory worked a little too well.
Destruct on my mark.
The drone can't be landed. It must be destroyed over the Gulf of Mexico.
3, 2, 1, mark.
Good, Mark. Drone is destroyed in half.
It's the ultimate breakdown for this F-4 Phantom. Back at his home base in Germany, Captain Timo Young got the recycled part he needed. The Attitude Direction Indicator, or ADI. He's now taking a rebuilt Phantom for a series of test flights. If it passes, the jet will re-enter his squadron. For Captain Nastula and his crew, another breakdown is already underway. And with every breakdown, the final goodbye to this legendary fighter jet gets a little closer.
Visibility.
Blade ready for departure.
That's ready for departure.